The Brony International Guard by Psycicscubadiver. The Big comes to town. I don't know, but I've been told. I don't know, but I've been told. Eskimo ponies are mighty cold. Eskimo ponies are mighty cold. They are cute. They are cute. Real cute. Real cute. Cute to me. Cute to me. And cute to you. Cute to you. I don't know, but I've been told. Hey, Twilight? Twilight stopped reading, setting her latest book next to her breakfast plate and a long empty tea mug. Spike sounded worried. What is it? The small dragon stared out the window, transfixed by whatever he was watching. You'll have to see it to believe it, but there's a group of creatures on the front lawn. Puzzled, Twilight looked out the window. It was a good thing she'd finished her tea, or she would have sprayed a mouthful over her number one assistant. She was silent for a long moment before finally gathering her wits long enough to ask a hopeful question. Spike, did you put something in my tea? Nope. Twilight sighed. I was afraid of that. Her yard was full of tall, vaguely ape-like creatures arranged in a 5x5 square formation. They stood on only their hind legs, all in the same posture with their forelimbs tucked behind their backs. Their clothing was almost identical, pants of some rough blue material and shirts the same purple as her coat. A pile of large mottled green packs filled with Celestia knew what rested next to them. Twilight stared at them in wonder. She couldn't have thought anything could be fully bipedal without a tail to balance it. By all rights, the creatures should have been falling over right and left, but they held their poses without any sort of tremor, waiting for something. The way they stared at the library made it painfully obvious who they were waiting for. A small crowd of ponies had begun to gather, watching the strange creatures and whispering to each other. The ponies occasionally shouted questions or greetings to the creatures, but no responses were given. Twilight watched both crowds thoughtfully before speaking again. I don't suppose I could just flip the sign closed and ignore them, could I? Twilight! Spike glared at her. Why not? She said, gesturing to the strange creatures waiting for her. Ponyville goes through a different crisis every other week. Can't I sit this one out? Spike shrugged. Only if you want to see how patient those creatures are. I don't think standing around for hours improves anyone's temper. Twilight sighed. You're right. I just wish you weren't. Twilight trotted over to the door of the library, her magic wrenching it open. Let's get this over with, she muttered under her breath. Twilight stepped outside, instantly becoming the center of the creature's attention. All of them were watching her intently, and she couldn't help but wonder how similar their facial expressions were to ponies. Every one of them looked like a filly on heartwarming eve. Some hid their excitement better than their peers, but Twilight was getting the same vibe of barely repressed joy from their whole group. This was weirder than she had expected. They watched her, waiting for something. She wanted nothing more than to go back inside, but with a sigh, which seemed to be a theme for the morning, she addressed them. Hello. Who and what are you? Please identify yourselves. Then she had a horrifying thought. You wouldn't happen to speak our language, would you? Wouldn't that just be her luck if they didn't? Fortunately, the creatures were better prepared than that. The individual in the center of the front row stepped forward. While she knew she was assuming, Twilight believed the creature to be male, an opinion reinforced by its deep voice. Hello. To answer your questions in order, we are the Brony International Guard. Our species is human, and yes, we can speak your language. This announcement was met by absolute silence, until a triumphant voice in the crowd broke it. Aha! I told you they were real bonbon! Who's the crazy pony now? I'm about to be, Twilight thought grimly. But this wasn't the time for negativity. She needed to consider her next question carefully. These creatures were obviously well prepared and well organized. They also seemed to have more than a few screws loose given the way they were eyeing her. It would take careful diplomacy to navigate these waters. Twilight cleared her throat. Do you mind if I ask why you have come to Equestria? Lear's face brightened even more, and he broke into an open smile. Not at all. I was hoping we'd get to that soon. He paused for a moment. You see, all humans devote themselves to something they admire. It can be a nation, a set of ideals, another human, or even just themselves. The point is that every person finds something they love and does their best to spend their life in service to it. We've heard many stories. Stories of your wisdom, magic, and courage. He fell to one knee, his head bowed, and with a fist planted in the ground, a motion so smooth it had to have been practiced. All of the other creatures did the same. The leader continued speaking from his kneeling position. And thus we have chosen to devote ourselves to you, Twilight Sparkle. Will you accept our service? You what? Twilight would not believe what she was hearing. The world began to fade into blackness, and Twilight realized that she was hyperventilating. Through the disorientation, she could vaguely hear two voices from the kneeling mob of humans. Reaction scenario 15. Told ya, one voice said. Yeah, a slightly deeper voice replied. We'll see, Mark. It's not over till the fat pony sings. Through sheer force of will, Twilight composed herself, and slowly the world regained focus. The humans were still kneeling, but their faces had turned up, and they were watching her with concern. Eventually, she got her mind together enough to speak. There were plenty of good questions Twilight should have asked, and could have asked. How did you hear these stories is a good one, or maybe, what would this devotion and service entail exactly? Unfortunately, she wouldn't think of those until later. So for now, she merely blurted out what first came to mind. Why me? The leader opened his mouth to speak, but another voice interrupted him. Because we really like your mane! And the humans just lost it, laughing so hard some of them actually fell over. These creatures are insane, Twilight thought, panicking. I've got to get some help. Well, she said, pretending to consider their offer. That's a big decision. Do you mind if I think about it for a while? The leader had recovered, though his face was still flushed with laughter. Of course, he said, bowing his head again. Take as long as you need. Thanks, she returned sarcastically. Then, with a short flash of light, she vanished. The humans all began murmuring at that, some worriedly, others excitedly. Spike came out from the library, curious about the creatures Twilight had confronted. He stared at the humans as they stood up, and began to mill amongst themselves, breaking formation. The leader had noticed Spike and walked over to him, giving him a small bow. Hello, Spike. It's an honor to meet you. The other humans took notice, and Spike soon had a line of creatures waiting for an introduction. Wow, he said after the third or fourth handshake. You guys are great. Why'd Twilight run off? The leader pondered the question. We offered to serve and obey her for the rest of our lives. She panicked slightly and asked for some time to decide. She probably just wants to talk with the rest of the main six. He paused. If so, she's in for a surprise. Then you won't want to be Twilight's assistants? Spike's eyes narrowed. Aloysius had been bad enough. He wasn't going to put up with all these weirdos as competition. No, more like a cross between the Royal Guard and servants. People who protect her and perform whatever tasks are beneath her. Spike thought about that for a moment. So, since I'm her number one assistant, he began, bringing a smile to all of the humans within earshot, would you still have to listen to me? The group looked towards their leader, and he considered the question carefully. Yes, but only within reason. Spike rubbed his claws together, grinning widely. Excellent! Meanwhile, Twilight moved at a steady trot toward Sugar Cube Corner. These creatures are crazy, and if anybody knows crazy, it's Pinkie Pie. Well, it wasn't something she'd ever tell her friend. It was true nonetheless. I'm sure she'll know what to do. Maybe she can talk them into leaving me alone, or failing that, just lead them out of town the same way she did the bear sprites. In reality, there was no way of predicting just what Pinkie Pie would do. A fact that asserted itself forcefully as she rounded the corner and came within sight of her goal. Pinkie was lounging on a crude but large throne assembled out of crates, boxes, and other odd items. She sat with a proud and regal expression, slowly stroking the gator next to her. In and of itself, that sight wasn't too odd. She was Pinkie Pie after all. However, the long line of humans, each holding a tray with some kind of baked goods, was definitely outside the norm. Another crowd of ponies, this one smaller than the bunch at the library, had gathered to watch. The humans were similar to the group she'd left behind, but instead of purple shirts, this group was wearing bright pink, the same shade as Pinkie's coat. Twilight was beginning to sense a pattern. "Another pastry!" Pinkie demanded imperiously. The next human in line approached the throne, kneeling. The female, as far as Twilight could tell at least, offered her tray on which a single slice of pie sat. Pinkie eyed the treat thoughtfully before actually picking it up and taking a single bite. She said, devouring the rest of the treat in the blink of an eye. "That was delicious!" The human started to smile, but was cut short by Pinkie's next statement. "But unfortunately, you used a pinch too much cinnamon. Guards!" A pair of humans Twilight hadn't noticed before stepped out from behind the throne. They watched Pinkie waiting for an order. She didn't disappoint. "Tickle her!" "Yes, Your Highness," they replied in stereo. The hoots and laughter from the tickling began to draw an even bigger crowd of ponies to the spectacle. "Let that be a lesson to you," Pinkie said to her line of supplicants. "Only the best will satisfy the Queen of Sweets." "Yes, oh sugary one," they shouted in return, their expressions amused. "Pinkie," Twilight yelled. "What is wrong with her? Did power really go to her head that quickly?" But as Pinkie saw Twilight, her face brightened, losing its haughty expression. "Hey, Twilight, we're playing a game! Do you want to join in? You could be the royal magician protecting the Queen of Sweets from the terrible machinations of Tooth Decay and other villains. Oh, where are my manners? Every human pay attention!" She yelled to her followers, as though they'd been doing anything else. "This is my bestest friend ever, Twilight Sparkle. Twilight, this is the Pinkie division of the Big, which spells big, which is funny because they are big. Isn't that just hilarious?" The gathered humans waited until Pinkie was done rambling, then bowed to Twilight. One of the guards approached Twilight and gave another short bow. "Hello, Twilight. I am the division leader, Rick. It is nice to meet you." Twilight nodded in reply and turned her attention back to Pinkie. "What are you doing? Did they ask to serve you too?" Pinkie gasped. "Wow, that's right! I was just baking when Mrs. K called for me. She sounded really worried, but it was just Rick. He wanted to know if the Brony International Guard could swear a lifelong devotion to me, and I said, sure, okay. And now we're all friends, and I'm going to throw a big, huge party for all the humans next Saturday." Twilight just blinked. "Pinkie, you couldn't organize a party for 50 ponies that soon, much less 50 creatures you just met today." Rick cleared his throat noisily. Twilight turned to face him. "It's actually 250. Twilight was speechless. Less if the non-Ponyville divisions don't come in. "Ooh, that many? We'd better get cracking them." She turned to face the crowd of followers. "Does any human want to help me plan a party?" The hand of every human present shot into the air. Pinkie giggled. "Then follow me!" and bounced back into Sugar Cube Corner. They obeyed, streaming into the bakery, and Twilight wondered how Mr. and Mrs. Cake were going to react to that. But she didn't have time to ponder. She needed more information. "Rick, would you mind answering some questions for me?" The human paused, shooting a longing glance at the rest of his group before smoothing his expression and facing Twilight. "Yeah, sure. What would you like to know?" Twilight thought. She had so many questions. "How did all of you come to be here?" "Well, all humans devote themselves to something." "I've already heard that speech," Twilight interrupted. "I want to know how you learned about us and our language when we've never even heard of creatures like you before." "Oh," Rick said, his eyes widening in understanding. He thought for a moment. "The answer's pretty complicated. Do you mind if I give you the short version?" Twilight motioned for him to continue. Anything was better than nothing. "Where we're from, storytelling is an art form. How the people who tell your stories discovered them, we don't know. But we believed Equestria wasn't a work of fiction, so we made traveling here our goal. Everyone said we were crazy, but through ingenuity and obsessive dedication, we finally got here. Twilight's mind boggled. You mean we have hundreds of human fans? Individuals we never knew existed have been listening to our adventures and looking up to us? The human chuckled. Try hundreds of thousands of fans, but few of them are as dedicated as us. Twilight's mouth almost hit the ground. Rick shrugged. There's lots of humans, but even then your popularity was surprising. Hundreds of thousands. Despite Twilight's knowledge of mathematics, that was a difficult number to grasp when applied to something like living beings. She'd almost come to terms with the impossibility of the situation when her train of thought was derailed. Hurry up, Rick! Pinkie called, popping her head out of one of the bakery's windows. We can't start without you! Coming! The human called back. He turned to go, but Twilight put a hoof on his arm, making him pause. But I've still got dozens of questions, Twilight exclaimed. Rick shook his head. Pinkie needs me, but your division leader would be more than happy to help. I'm kind of trying to avoid them. Rick frowned. Then try Jason. He's the division leader over at Sweet Apple Acres. He turned, hurrying back to his sugary sovereign. Twilight thought she heard the human mutter something about Scenario 15, but it was too faint to be certain. Going to see Applejack was a good idea, though. If there was any pony with a solid head on her shoulders, it was the Orange Farmer. Twilight had no doubt her advice would come in handy. Besides, Division Leader Jason was the only lead she had, and her questions weren't answering themselves. So, she began the trek towards her friend's farm, hoping some pony could make sense out of all this mess. Spike crossed his fingers as the humans read over his list. He finished with a nod. I think we can handle this. Yes! Spike cheered. Except for one task on the list, he said. Spike stopped mid-victory dance and frowned. Which one? The division leader checked the list again. Item number 34. Refresh my memory? We will not, and I quote, help you get your groove on with rarity. Spike was crestfallen. But that's the most important one! Okay, if I cut through the meadows instead of taking the path, I think I can reduce travel time by 5.5 minutes. Twilight calculated as she left Ponyville. She didn't really need the time, she knew, but she was in a hurry to see her friend. Besides, it was a lovely day to take a trot through the meadows. The weather was warm, with a soft breeze blowing. The flowers were in bloom, filling the air with their sweet perfume. The birds were chirping, the bees were buzzing, the humans were shouting. Wait, what? Twilight crested a small hill, and she discovered that she had correctly identified the strange noise. It was another crowd of humans in the meadow below, these ones wearing light blue shirts. Twilight could guess who they belonged to, even before she saw Dash hovering over them. Okay, we'll try it once more, the Blue Pegasus said to her fans. I'll do the super speed strut, but you guys have got to get the timing right on the special effects. Sure thing, boss, chimed a trio of humans wearing heavy gloves and metalworking goggles. And I want to see some real pep in the routine, girls. I want to hear you from 600 feet up. You got it, Dash. Their small, revealing shirts made Twilight confident they were females. The upper abdomen was an odd place for udders, but Twilight didn't know what else that could be. Dash took off, rocketing into the sky and preparing her trick. The trio and goggles threw themselves into their work, adjusting and repositioning a lot of equipment on the ground. While they were working, Twilight got to see the routine Dash had been referring to. The 4 girls lined up and began to cheer, swinging rainbow-colored pom-poms in time to their words. 1, 2, 3, 4, who's the pony we adore? Rainbow Dash, Rainbow Dash, Rainbow, Rainbow, Rainbow Dash. The rest of the crowd joined in response. Twilight's ears folded down, and she fought the urge to cover them with her hoofs. If Dash can't hear them, she's deaf. But they weren't done yet. 5, 6, 7, 8. All her tricks are so first-rate. Rainbow Dash, Rainbow Dash, Rainbow, Rainbow, Rainbow Dash. Fastest flyer's ever been. Tell us who it is again. Rainbow Dash, Rainbow Dash, Rainbow, Rainbow, Rainbow Dash. The girl who knows where it's at clears the sky in 10 seconds flat. Rainbow Dash, Rainbow Dash, Rainbow, Rainbow, Rainbow Dash. The cheering girls dropped their pom-poms and gave Twilight an impressive display of agility and balance. After a running start, they flipped multiple times, their hands letting them spring back into an upright position. Then 3 of them picked up the 4th and flung her high into the air, demonstrating excellent strength and coordination. Twilight gasped as the human flipped and spun, but the 3 below safely caught her at the last moment. The crowd erupted into more cheers, and now that her audience was thoroughly prepped, Dash made her entrance. Twilight had seen this trick before, but never like this. Every time one of Dash's hoofs hit the ground, a burst of fireworks would explode nearby, leaving a glimmering trail as she zipped across the meadow. At the very front of the crowd, she braked, pulling off a seemingly impossible stop. Dash struck a pose, wings fanned outward, as flames in all colors of the rainbow erupted behind her. Twilight thought she had heard the loudest the humans could offer, but it turned out she was wrong. The noise they were making now was somewhere between deafening and, "Dear Celestia, my ears are bleeding!" Dash nodded happily, preening in front of her latest fans. "Not bad, every pony. We'll take a 10-minute break and then start looking for a volunteer for the new Buccaneer plays. Whoever we get, try and make sure it's some pony sturdy." You know what, Twilight thought. Maybe the main path would be a better choice after all. "Get back, hell beast!" The human screamed at the monster before him. The horrible gelatinous blob hissed as the human darted closer towards, hemming it in. How the thing hissed in the absence of a throat, vocal cords, or even a recognizable mouth was a question no Brony felt interested in discovering. The thing reared back and spat pieces of itself at the advancing humans. The division leader ducked as the projectile went flying over his head. A muffled thump told him not everyone was so lucky. "It got Martin! He's out cold!" shouted a panicked voice to his left. "Then pick up his taser and hold the line, damn it! We've got to force the thing back to the portal!" He bellowed back. Diving forward, he managed to touch the creature with his stun gun. The horde's screech was just as strange as its earlier hiss, but at least it retreated further. Spike's out on the stairs, sulking because the humans wouldn't let him help. "You know," he told the embattled humans crossly, "there's a reason I said not to mess with anything in Twilight's lab." Twilight stopped just outside the gates of Sweet Apple Acres, breathing heavily. She wasn't used to making this journey at a trot. "I really need to get into shape," she thought. Working as a librarian was rewarding, but rarely did it give an opportunity for exercise. "Hey, Twilight, can we help you?" It was another pair of humans, these ones wearing orange shirts. They were carrying various tools and a few pieces of lumber. One crouched to address Twilight face to face, while the bigger of the two set about examining the old gate. Twilight stopped, slowing her panting, and replied, "No, thank you. I'm just a little winded." Then she eyed the pair of creatures. "Let me guess, you two are sworn to Applejack?" They nodded, and the shorter one spoke again. "Yep, and she asked us to fix this gate so it doesn't stick out anymore." Twilight sighed. This wasn't any easier to face the third time. "Am I the only one of us who didn't say yes?" she wondered. Her pessimistic side said yes. Her optimistic side wasn't saying anything at all. "Could you tell me where Applejack is?" Sure, she was in the South Fields, but I think she'd be at the farmhouse by now. Lunch isn't too far away," replied the same human. The bigger one just nodded again as he started working on the gate. Twilight's stomach rumbled at the mention of lunch, and she decided the farmhouse was definitely the place to check first. "Thanks," she said as she began to trot away. The two took one last look at the retreating unicorn, and the larger human held out his hand, eyeing his shorter companion. His friend gave a sharp glare in response. Yeah, I'll pay up later, you conniving bastard," he sighed. "I still can't believe she went with reaction 15. Twilight, unaware of the money riding on her, continued deeper into the farm, and found Granny Smith and Apple Bloom setting up a veritable feast on a long trestle table. Twilight's stomach rumbled louder, catching the attention of a certain filly. "Well, howdy, Twilight! What brings you to Sweet Apple Acres?" "I was hoping to talk to Applejack about Ponyville's newest guests." "You mean the Who-Mans? Well, shucks, they're great. They've been helping out on the farm since early this morning. They were kind of scary at first, but they're real nice once you get to know them." Twilight eyed the younger pony. Nice wasn't the word she would have used to describe them, but there was no use starting an argument. "So they came here early this morning? How early? And did they ask Applejack for anything?" The filly pondered the question. I don't know. They were waiting for us outside the farmhouse when I woke up. It scared Granny something awful, but Applejack and Mac went outside and I had to talk with them. Applejack says they're nuttier than a pecan tree, but since they wanted to help out, she ain't gonna stop them. Y'all talking about me? Twilight turned to see Applejack, leading a large group of humans to the long, heavily laden table. The cow pony smiled at the sight of her friend. You want to join us for lunch, Twi? Well, I wouldn't want to be a bother, she began, but a rumble from her stomach interrupted her. Applejack laughed as her friend blushed. Don't you worry none. Another mouth ain't gonna take much difference. She turned towards the sweaty bunch of humans and gestured to Twilight. This here's my friend, Twilight, and she'll be joining us for lunch. All y'all say howdy to her and then get yourselves washed up. She pointed to a trough filled with water at the side of the barn and trotted that way herself. The humans bowed to Twilight and then followed Applejack. They're as bad as the Royal Guards, she thought. You'd think they were serving a princess instead of a farmer and a student. Big Mac and a few more humans trickled in, while the first group was still washing. The line vanished as the red farm pony approached. The humans insisted that Big Mac go first. Twilight shook her head and walked over to where Applejack was taking her younger sister. And make sure you set aside some for the two working on the gate. Oh, hey, Twilight, you wanted to talk about something? Twilight nodded. Yes, I do. She hesitated for a moment, but took the plunge. Did you really agree to let them follow you? I mean, I can understand Pinkie and even Dash doing it, but you're one of the most sensible ponies I know, Applejack. How could you when we don't know anything about these creatures? Applejack's face set into stubborn lines, and Twilight was afraid she'd said too much. But the farm pony just sighed and readjusted her hat. I can see where you're coming from, Twi, but the farm could use the help. They're offering free labor, and they've all got some skills that are useful. We could finally get Big Mac a better plow or Granny Smith a new hip. Hey, I'm planning on loaning out some of them to my cousins once apple bucking season starts. Besides, I looked each one of them in the eye, and they asked if they were being honest about helping us. Every last one of them was sincere as they come. Sure, they're weird, but I ain't gonna turn them down. But no buts, Applejack interrupted, and this time she was really set. Twilight wanted to argue further, but she could see that it would be a waste of time. Applejack had decided, and as far as the farmer was concerned, that was that. Twilight sighed. She could still talk to the division leaders, at least. Applejack turned to yell at the milling group of humans. Come and get it, y'all! Twilight called, as well as the humans began to move towards the table. Is there a Jason here? Rick said to talk to you. One human, noticeably thinner than the rest, separated himself from the group. He bowed to her and spoke. Hello, Miss Twilight. I'm Jason. What do you need? Twilight nodded and gave him a smile. I've got some questions that I need you to answer. Could you stand next to me at lunch? There were a couple adjacent places left empty next to Applejack. More difference to their superiors, I suppose. It annoyed her, but right now she had more important things to focus on. The two helped themselves to some of the pastries Granny Smith had made, and the human sat down, putting him at Twilight's eye level. Jason, could you tell me more about your species? Twilight asked, munching on her apple turnover. Jason set down the pastry he'd almost bitten into and responded. Well, humans are intelligent bipedal primates. We're naturally omnivorous, and we can eat a wide variety of fruits, grains, vegetables, and animals. He grinned, showing off a pair of small canines. Twilight gave him a disgusted look, and he laughed. But everybody here has agreed to become a vegetarian. Placated, Twilight took another bite of her lunch and motioned for him to continue. We can't do magic, but our hands, especially our opposable thumbs, let us manipulate tools and objects with precision. We're an inventive and adaptive race, and can live in almost any climate. Modern humans are mostly peaceful, but we can be aggressive when provoked. He finished and reached for his lunch, but Twilight shot another question before he could touch it. What about the Brony International Guard? What's a Brony? How is it international, and why is it a guard? Jason sighed. Brony is a term for a pony fan. Most bronies are young men like me, but there are some girls and older adults as well. As to the international part, most of us are from America, but there are a few Brits and Canucks mixed in. He shrugged, a gesture interestingly similar to a pony's. But we called it that because we like the acronym. And we're a guard because we didn't want to overwhelm Ponyville with a chaotic mass of bronies. Twilight frowned curiously. What do you mean by that? Well, Jason continued, as soon as we discovered we could travel here, we realized that the only way multiple people could come to Equestria was if we organized ourselves. Otherwise, you'd have a flood of people without a leader, plan, or means of self-support, severely disrupting everything. Besides, you and your friends face a lot of dangerous creatures, so you could certainly use a guard. Twilight raised both eyebrows and gave Jason a look that managed to perfectly convey the thought, and I'm certain your help will be invaluable, complete with sarcastic tone. Jason laughed again. Not that we don't think you can't take care of yourselves, but everybody needs some help sometimes. That's actually our main goal. We want to be useful in Everpony's day-to-day life. Twilight opened her mouth to ask for info on that, but she was cut off by the sound of yelling further down the table. Yeah, well, who died and made you princess? One human yelled at another across the table. Rising to his feet, the second responded in kind. Shut the hay up or I'll drop kick you to the freaking moon! The two growled at each other, and Twilight was afraid they would actually start fighting. Hey! Jason bellowed in a tone of absolute authority, and slowly stood up. Every human stopped in their activity, and silence ruled the table. Twilight was surprised at the slim human. She wouldn't have thought he had it in him. Love and tolerate, Brony. We're in Equestria now. His voice was softer, but still just as stern. The two bickering humans considered the strange remark, and their faces grew shamed. They turned to each other, all traces of their earlier hostility gone. Sorry I acted like that. Rohoof? The first one asked, sticking out a fist. I'm sorry. Shouldn't have been such a jerk. But yeah, Rohoof. The second confirmed, bumping his fist with the preferred one. They sat back down, and the rest of the humans started a small round of applause. Jason turned to Applejack. Sorry about that. It won't happen again. Applejack chuckled. Shoot, every pony argues. I'm just glad there ain't any hard feelings. Applebloom, though, caught Twilight's eyes and made a corkscrew motion around one temple. Twilight tried not to laugh as Jason settled back into his sitting position. Where were we? He asked. Twilight thought for a moment, levitating another pastry from one of the rapidly dwindling stacks to her plate. She couldn't remember what she had been about to ask, but another question occurred to her. Why us, though? I know there are stories about us, but how did that convince all of you to leave behind everything you knew to swear service to us? Jason opened his mouth to respond, but Twilight wasn't quite finished. And I've already heard the explanation about humans devoting themselves to what they love. Jason shut his mouth promptly, proving to Twilight that she'd guessed correctly. He chuckled and began speaking. Okay, I won't give you the standard answer, but the real reason is different for every person. Some of us never fit in back home and just wanted a fresh start. Some of us think Equestria is the closest thing to heaven this side of the afterlife, and some of us really do just love the ponies so much we want to spend our lives with them. You'll get a different answer from every brony you ask. We're united in purpose, but each person has their own story and motivations. I'm afraid I can't answer for everyone. Twilight blinked in surprise at the answer. It was odd to think that the humans had real individuals. Until now, they just acted like two-dimensional characters. Annoying ones at that. Realizing they actually had depth didn't make her suddenly like them, but it was different to think of the humans as people instead of problems to solve. Twilight's thoughtfulness wasn't lost on Jason, who reached once more for his lunch. He almost had it when she spoke again. I hadn't considered that. But I have to ask, what are your reasons? He paused and considered. I see Applejack as a role model. She's honest, dependable, and dedicated. She stands for what she believes in and always works her hardest. He grinned widely with a mischievous gleam in his eyes. I want to be like her when I grow up. Twilight laughed, almost choking on her turnover, but paused after a moment, her expression darkening. That was a joke, right? If the humans actually got any bigger than they were now, that would be problematic. He nodded. Yes, we're all fully grown, even though we don't act like it. Twilight heaved a sigh of relief. That worry relieved, she turned back to her questions. So what exactly did you mean when you said that the big intended to help out in everyday life? We've all learned some skills and trades that we thought would be helpful to the ponies we follow. Everyone here has a skill that's useful on a farm. Pinkie's division is mostly bakers. Your team is all scholars, mostly science majors. Dash's crew is a motley combination of athletes, trainers, stuntmen, cheerleaders, and pyrotechnic experts, and firework makers. Rarity has a bunch of tailors, jewelers, and other such. Fluttershy's followers are mostly vets with them. Fluttershy! Twilight shouted. She should have realized it before, but of course there was a group dedicated to the Quiet Pegasus, too. Oh, poor Fluttershy. She's probably holed up in her cottage, afraid to even step out, Twilight thought. Even I was afraid of them at first, and Fluttershy is scared of her own shadow. The unicorn devoured her remaining pastry in scant seconds and rose to leave. I'm sorry to eat and run, Applejack, but I need to make sure Fluttershy's alright. It's alright, Sugar Cube. Looks like just about every pony's already done now, anyhow. You give Fluttershy my best and come back when you can. The farmer leaned over and drew her friend into a quick hug. Don't get your tail in a knot over these humans. You worry too much sometimes. Twilight smiled. Thanks, Applejack. And thank you, Jason. You were very helpful. He smiled and rose to give a shallow bow. I aim to please. Twilight only laughed in response and hurried towards the gate. Jason watched as the lavender unicorn broke into a canter and vanished behind rows of apple trees. He sighed softly to himself, but quickly brightened and licked his lips. And now that there are no more distractions, the human looked down at his plate to find the yellow filly staring up at him. Oh, ain't you hungry? Applebloom asked, looking at his untouched apple turnover. Before he could say a word, she hit the plate with one hoof, neatly flipping the whole pastry into her waiting mouth. Too bad, she said, muffled through all the food in her mouth. Granny makes a mean turnover. Just ask your friends. She gestured with one hoof to the empty platters and satisfied humans along the rest of the table. She turned back and frowned quizzically. Hey, you okay? Your eyes are watering up something fierce. Did you get dust in them or something? Spike walked into the lab, watching the humans messing around with a bunch of their stuff. He turned to the nearest one. Hey, what's your name? Philip, or just Philip for short. Spike nodded. At least one of them had a normal name. So, Philip, what are you guys doing? Well, Philip replied, we're setting up some experiments and devices from home. I'm working on a device that spins a coil of copper wire surrounded by magnets, which... Wait, magnets? How do those work? Hey, why is everybody laughing? Spike glared at the room was quiet. Well, until the noise was at a manageable level. Really? How? Still chuckling, Phil managed to get a strange and convoluted explanation that lost Spike after the first 3 words. Okay, never mind. Jeez, that's boring. Anything interesting? How about an experiment proving the microorganism theory of disease? Sounds lame. Monte Hall paradox? More like the boring Hall snooze-a-dox. Phil shrugged. We've got a baking soda and vinegar volcano we were going to present at Shirley's next science lesson. A what? Spike gasped. Phil poured some powder and a red liquid into a small model of a volcano, and within moments, bright red lava was bubbling out of the top. Spike watched, his eyes glimmering, and nodded solemnly. Now that's science! End part 1.